A couple of weeks ago, I heard Karen Volker tell about things that URI is doing in India and things that URI is doing in Africa. And I had never heard this before or anything like it. And I thought, wow, this is something that the SAC needs to hear about. So I invited Karen to brief us today on the kind of work that you've started there and what's the response and the response and the response. Karen, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I have a small presentation. I think pictures actually sort of convey a lot. So if you don't mind, I'm going to throw some slides up for you to just see a little bit of the action that's been going on around the country, around the world with respect to violence prevention. So, nope, not yet. I just have to get the, have to share my screen.
Karen, can you first describe just a teeny bit about your background and where you are, the newcomer?
Sure thing. Yeah, before I do that. So my name's Karen Volker, and I've been with URI for about 15, 16 months. I came to URI after a 26-year career at the State Department, where I was a U.S. diplomat posted overseas and in Washington. And then I spent 10 years working for an international nonprofit organization called Cure Violence Global. And it was at Cure Violence Global where I learned about this health approach and really became sort of committed to the scaling of this approach globally. And when Jerry approached me about bringing this approach to URI, and I learned what URI is, I thought, wow, this is a match made in heaven. So I can tell you more about exactly what the health approach is, because some of you haven't heard it, but I think what I'll do is offer to give you a separate briefing on the health approach and just use my time here to update you on the work we've done in the last 12 months since I really got my feet on the ground at URI. So let me share my screen and go into presentation mode. All right. So this is just a very quick update. Bill, it's going to actually include Honduras and some other things too, because since you and I met, we've done more. So okay. The key updates, basically starting last year, my goal was to really introduce first and foremost the staff, the trustees, and the Senior Advisory Council to the health approach, and then take it out to the regional staff and then through them to the regions. And so we've been building up through various webinars and trainings, and now we have monthly community calls and then intermittent specific webinars or coaching sessions, which I'll tell you more about, that are on an ongoing basis. And that's really just all about pushing out the approach. We decided though, and not even just decided, we were asked. When I presented on this in Kigali at the global meeting, a few of our staff members came up to me and said, I really want to bring this to my region. Could you come do a training in our region? And so that's what I'm going to brief you on here. So in November, I went to Jos, Nigeria, and I did a 2-day training on the health approach to violence prevention. And at this training, we trained 25 individuals from 15 CCs, cooperation circles, and partner organizations. And at the end of the 2-day session, they were given certificates that said, you know, that they had attended a violence prevention in Nigeria training. And they, to a person, demanded that they redo the certificates and say it's a certificate that they attended a training on the health approach to violence prevention. And this was because they felt it was so new and innovative and useful for their context that they didn't want just another. They'd all been trained in violence prevention in the past, and they felt that this approach brought something new and different that they could use in their communities. And then, unbeknownst to me, without any prompting from me, they developed a training program to be held March of this year. I found out about it about a week beforehand, so I had literally nothing to do with this. This was on their own accord. And they trained 70 faith leaders and actors, and they included government officials and other international organizations in the health approach to violence prevention. And so this was carried on the evening news in Nigeria, and it got a lot of publicity for URI. And it took this approach that we had trained these 25 individuals, all 25 of them, all the individuals wanted to participate and bring this training forward, but a couple of the CCs took the lead. And so they are now trying to figure out how they're going to continue spreading this throughout Nigeria and throughout West Africa. February of this year, so back in Kigali, we were approached by our West India coordinator, who was very concerned about the violence happening in Manipur. I don't know how much you've been focused on that, but there was a lot of violence that erupted in May of last year. So it was very much new and very much on this individual's mind at the time of our meeting in Kigali. And he said, I'd like to bring you to Kolkata to do a training on the health approach. Well, we went there, and at that training, we trained about 10 different people, but instead of making it just India and just West India focused, East India focused, it was our Asia director asked us to make it Asia focused, and he brought people from Sri Lanka also, and from all over India, not just East India. And so they took the health approach. And while we were there, we also, on the top right photo, met with a couple, both top right and bottom left are in our community visits that we did with cooperation circles and the members of the communities. And this top right picture I'm pointing out because I've just learned last week that that imam and the other members of the Muslim community that we met with would like to be trained in the health approach after having spent an afternoon hearing about it. And they are dealing with violence between Hindus and Muslims in their community. So I'm working with BSPDEV to bring that training to this group of people who are forming an organization and will actually join URI as a new CC. So here's just briefly some of the feedback we got from that India training. I'm not going to read all of the quotes. I can circulate this later and you can read it at that time. But the main point is it was found to be useful and innovative and appreciated. So the next steps with our Asia team is to train a cohort of trainers in Asia who can then take this throughout India and throughout Asia, and to develop a curriculum to be introduced into schools in India. The latter is being led by Abraham, who many of you may know. He's been with URI for a very long time, maybe from the beginning, and has done a lot of work in schools and leads an initiative called A Billion Youth for Peace. And that particular curriculum development initiative is of interest to the UN Office on Genocide Prevention, as they're very intrigued with what we're trying to do there. And so that might be an opportunity to collaborate with the UN on something. The second thing we did in Kolkata was a workshop specifically with the three representatives of the three ethnic groups from Manipur, from this region where violence had erupted. So we had Métis, Kuki, and Naga representatives who all came together. Now these people who are actively killing each other, and before they came, they did not want to even meet in the same room. So we had devised a whole way of dealing with that issue. And we started off the workshop by having them each tell us their version of what's causing the history, what is the history of the violence, and then listening to those stories from each one of them. So they all felt that they had been heard by our entire URI Asia team, and felt like they knew that we knew why they were there and what was their view about the violence. After that, we did a whole series of exercises. It was a 2-day workshop that combined this health approach to violence prevention with an approach developed by William Ury at the Harvard Project on Negotiation. That it was called the Third Side, but it's really about bringing the community into finding a solution. And in this case, we applied that finding the solution to stopping the violence. We walked them through a number of exercises that I won't, again, go into detail on this. I can answer questions if you like, but it took them into the future to imagine a time when peace had been accomplished. What did that look like? And they worked together on this, not separately. They identified key actors who would be useful for stopping the violence there in Manipur, so not like at a global level or national level, but really who was useful and important to contact in Manipur who could stop the violence. We walked them through some strategic empathy exercises, and then we created an influence map for who these people listen to and how to reach them. They created a list of confidence building measures that could be used to build confidence between the three groups in order to facilitate this reduction of violence. And they agreed on concrete steps that they could each take to try to reach these individuals who could stop the violence. So this was different from just a training on the health approach. Then the next thing in April of this year, together with our partner from Cure Violence, Maria and Larissa and Lupe, who's in the bottom left there, all went to Honduras and trained, I guess it was about 35 people. All of them were our practitioners who work with young women and girls who are themselves victims of violence or come from communities where there are high levels of violence. And this is a program that was funded by a donation that we received from an individual donor named Jessica Sarowitz. And the next thing that we're going to do on this is to actually do a training on male masculinity and how it contributes to gender-based violence. And that will be at a school in Tegucigalpa, a boys' school that our local partner organization also works with. And then we're also, through this project, organizing a gathering of Indigenous elders and youth to talk about the issues that they face, but specifically violence that the Indigenous community faces. And two of our Indigenous council members have requested to be trained in the health approach so that they can then take it to that gathering when they meet in July. So this was, again, some of the feedback that we received from the Honduras training. I'll send this around afterwards, or I'll have Diana send it. So looking ahead, we've confirmed our monthly violence prevention community calls. We're continuing to work with the Manipur group to help support them and keep them motivated and keep them moving forward. Working with Ruben is actually working with Abraham on the development of the violence prevention curriculum to be introduced into schools. I told you about the workshop on male masculinity. And coming out of the India training, our Sri Lanka coordinator and two of the participants from Sri Lanka have decided to take the health approach training and give it in Sri Lanka starting in June. And the first training will be in the central province of Sri Lanka with 40, and I was told this morning, 40 to 50 individuals from 5 cooperation circles. And then they're going to take this to 3 other provinces in Sri Lanka. So they are committed to taking this to all of Sri Lanka. And so we are supporting them in that and adapting these materials and answering their questions as they take this on to share with people in their communities. The things that are not yet confirmed that we have on our back burner or front burner, the launch of this global campaign to heal violence that was mentioned already. We're hoping to do a regional training for the 13 countries in West Africa because there's been a great demand for it after people heard about the training in Nigeria. I mentioned the Train the Trainer program in India, the Indigenous representative training that in Honduras, and then we're working with our MENA coordinator on a regional training for cooperation circles that will focus on violence reduction and exploring possibility of work with cooperation circles in both the UK and in Spain. Actually, the Spain one of our CCs just gave a presentation on URI and the health approach at the Catalonia Parliament of Religions this past weekend. And in the UK, I'm meeting with them on Friday to talk to them about there's a group of CCs who want to talk to us about how can they build a program to scale this approach and take it to all of the UK. So we're just going to have a session with them to discuss that. And one thing I even forgot to put on the slide here is that as a result of one of our violence prevention community calls, there's a CC in Cameroon that is interested in being trained individually in the health approach. They have focal points throughout the whole country that they work with. And so we're training all of their focal points on Friday in the health approach so that they can begin to integrate this into the work that they're doing in the communities. So every place that we go, it seems that there's a great enthusiasm and it really kind of catches on fire and takes off sometimes in directions that we can't even anticipate. So that's my patient. It was a lot. I speak fast. I apologize for that. But I'm able to answer any questions either now or at another time.
Great. Way to go, Karen. My goodness.
Thank you, Karen.
There are two people here from the Asia Foundation, Bill Fuller and Susan Siskel. Do you have, Susan, Suzanne, do you have any comment, or Bill, do you have any question or anything?
Suzanne, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm a little brain dead. I just got back from China. No, I'd like to know more actually about the training, maybe not in this session, but it sounds really promising, and I'd be really interested, given that the Asia Foundation does a lot of work on, especially work on stopping violence towards women and girls. And we do a lot of research on peace building and on understanding the dimensions of conflict. So very exciting, Karen. I'd really love to learn a lot more.
Perfect.
Good. Thank you, Suzanne. Bill?
Karen, I listened to the hour and 25 minutes of your strategic gang planning session that occurred when I was off some other place. It's fantastic. It is really good work, and I like the way that you're approaching this. One question that I think is going to come up. Training is terrific, I think. But the question is, if the context in which people will have to apply training later on is really bad, do we need to be worried more about the context as well as training? For example, if you have a wretched authoritarian regime, or you have weak laws and weak enforcement, or you have levels of discrimination that run through society. There are many other aspects of the context, some of which are cultural. So I'd be interested in sort of how you conceive of that, how we might take that into account.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. So the way we take it into account, Bill, is to look at the whole problem, right? Violence, it happens, but before it happens, there are things that contribute to it, right? And after it happens, there are people who are affected by that violence, either trauma, the suffering that they experience, what have you. So URI is perfectly organized and set up to be able to deal across this entire spectrum, because it has cooperation circles that work in all these 14 action areas. So if it's a place where you have, and then the other thing I'll say real quick before I move on is that because we have a local grassroots organizations, everybody who we train, all these cooperation circles, are very well placed to understand the context and adapt it and apply it to the local context and to whatever type of violence that they want to address or that they need to address. And so that's why the health approach, I think, is so good, because it's community-based, highly adaptable, and applicable in lots of different kinds of violence. And that's exactly the kind of coaching sessions that I'm having with different CCs, and with the Sri Lanka group, for example, is to help them think through that application and that adaptation. So the other thing that I'll say here is that, so on the precursors to violence, and it may be that there are some of the kinds of things you mentioned. It may be that there's structural violence, or there may be a dictatorial regime that's contributing to the violence, or what have you. Some of our CCs might be well placed to work in that area, others may not, right? So what we have to do is figure out where can we intervene, and we being that local partner, not me, not anyone in this room, right? But help them see where they can intervene effectively and start there, right? We can't do everything everywhere, but every place where there's violence, I would bet that there's something that a local URI partner could do something about it, right? And we can help them think that through and figure out where's the entry point for them.
Good,
That's
good.
I think.
Bob, did you have your hand up?
Yes. Karen, this sounds powerful. It sounds attractive. It sounds actionable. It just sounds marvelous that there's a program that we can actively get behind and promote. And I apologize for the question, but could you give me a 2 minutes on what the health approach to violence prevention is?
Absolutely. I've got like even a 30-second version for you. So
Great.
the health approach looks at violence as a behavior that can be prevented and which acts or spreads in a contagious manner, right? So it's about a bad behavior, not about bad people. So it immediately takes it out of the rule of law framework where most people have placed it for decades and places it into this other more health framework that allows you to address violence from a more holistic manner, right? It focuses on the importance of preventing violence. So, and because violence is contagious, and that's not just me saying that, there are studies that demonstrate this, dozens of studies that demonstrate the contagiousness of violence, the ways in which it's contagious, between types of violence, between individuals, and intergenerational. So this is the health approach in a nutshell. And then there's a way to deal with it that is based on the same approach the World Health Organization uses to interrupt and stop the spread of a contagious disease. So the World Health Organization's approach is to detect and interrupt. So detect where the virus is and then try to stop it from spreading. Change the behavior of the highest risk. So who are the people who are getting this virus? What are their behaviors that are contributing to them getting this virus? And how do we change those behaviors? And then what are the norms that are contributing to the spread of this violence? And how do we address those norms? So those are the three main components. And we apply them in the case of violence, anticipate and prevent violence. And again, here's where I think, especially in the context of religiously motivated violence, a global grassroots interfaith network is perfect for this. We have interfaith groups at a very local level in places where there's religiously motivated violence who know each other and probably know each other for dozens of years, who can talk to each other when they can anticipate that violence might happen and get ahead of it and stop it from happening. So we're asking them to do that, right? To think about when violence might happen and use your influence with other people that you know in the community to try to prevent that from happening.
Okay, he was saying, he was saying a 2 minute explanation. You said you could do it in 30 seconds.
I'm sorry, Bill. Thank you.
You did and you didn't. Okay.
Happy to meet anybody another time and talk about it.
Okay, other comments, but this is so important to get. Do I see any hands? Yes, Steve, yeah.
Are there places in the United States to deploy this?
Absolutely. It's being deployed, Steve, by Cure Violence Global in a lot of communities in the United States. And there are a lot of other organizations that are also using the health approach. They may call it something else. It's so I can connect you with the right people over at Cure Violence. And I believe it's something that we could even do more of within URI in terms of getting faith communities engaged.
Good, good. Any other comment? Okay, if not, Karen, thank you so much. This is the first time we've had any kind of report like that ever, and it was, thank you.
Thank you for
thank you.
having me. I will leave you now, and thank you so much.
Okay, we'll be talking.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, let me know what I can do. Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.